I love Grim Dawn. I've played a ton of different Diablo clones in my life. You know, Path of Exile, Last Epoch, Titan Quest, Diablo, and they're all basically the same game. But what I love so much about this entire genre is that every single game realizes, at least all the successful ones, they realize you can't just make Diablo again. You know, you have to take that core gameplay of, you know, left click, walk around, kill things, get loot, and level up, but you have to make it unique somehow. You know, Diablo is sort of the original. You know, you get gear, you know, you put skill points in your skill tree, and that's about it, based on the class you picked at the beginning. And every game has sort of slightly pivoted that. You know, you look at a game like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, and it's very, very similar, except it was brought to consoles. I think Diablo 3 was on consoles. I don't know if Diablo 2 ever was, but Dark Alliance was fantastic. It was actually my first experience with the Diablo-like. But Grim Dawn, let me rein myself back in here before I just start talking about all ARPGs as a whole. Grim Dawn, I think, is often really slept on. Now, it's not a completely hidden diamond in the rough in the grand scheme of things, but I think a lot of people don't talk about this game. Grim Dawn, it's a Diablo clone. You're gonna run around, you're gonna kill enemies, you're gonna get loot, you're gonna beat bosses, and you're going to keep getting more loot, but it does just enough so differently, from the aesthetic to the story to, yeah, I acting like I ever read the story. Hey, I read like 2 pieces of in-game lore, and I went, oh, that's neat. But I think what I love the most is it doesn't overcomplicate things, and the base difficulty of Grim Dawn can be beaten by anybody. I'm gonna say it, aside from some optional bosses, the base normal difficulty of Grim Dawn can be beaten by anybody, and that is something that I think it needs to be said as a good point. I have some issues with Path of Exile 2. If you've played Path of Exile 2 during its early access, you know that game really damn hard. Like, not an easy game, even as a casual player. There is no difficulty setting, which a lot of people out there are saying, oh, you know, that's by design, and that's okay. But if there are going to be difficult games by design, it's okay for there to be easier games by design. And I will always default to appreciating an easy game that gets hard over time versus a game like Path of Exile 2, which is just hard from default. So what makes Grim Dawn so easy? Well, first off, it's the sheer build customization that I love about Grim Dawn. Grim Dawn, without any DLC, has 6 base classes, and all of them have multiple builds you can do within each class. And beyond that, it's got a dual class system, meaning once you reach character level 20, you can start putting skill points in another class, which means of the 6 classes, you can pair any of them together, which has a unique class name, by the way. I'm playing a occultist soldier who I believe is called a witch knight or a witch blade or something. It's sick as hell. And so you've got every combination of classes, and then there's also just the ability to put all of your skill points into one class, which is just as cool to me. I played an entire build that was just Arcanist, no other points in any other class, and it was just as viable. And inside of every class are multiple abilities, when at the end of the day, you might be using 3 or 4 active abilities, where each class gets like 8 to 10 different options for abilities. You know, the Nightblade, it's the rogue of Grim Dawn, has access to this whole dual blade, dual wielding auto attack build where they have 9 or like 6 different abilities that all have a chance to proc on every auto attack. So you can make the entire build just those automatic abilities and as much attack speed as possible to get as many procs as possible. There's so many cool ways to build. I built an entire build around one ability. It's a laser. It's a Kamehameha wave, it's a laser, and it starts off so slow. It ramps up at a really good pace, where you start at level 1, you are classless. Every new character is classless. You start there, you just bonk things. You hit level 2, you pick a class, you get a starting ability, and you go. And that ability doesn't even need to be the ability you base your build around. A lot of builds are based around starter basic abilities. That was a lot of B's. But what you can do is just use those abilities temporarily and upgrade your class, because you can either spend skill points on abilities themselves or spend them on the class itself for raw stat boost, which I think is an awesome awesome way to divide it, because if you put skill points into abilities, those abilities get stronger, but your class and your base stats do not. And in order to access the higher level abilities of your class, you need to level up the class itself. Every class can have a total of 50 skill points put into it, but you get a ton of skill points, so it's really easy to max out your class, meaning, you know, that build I was talking about, which had a laser. The laser was its main ability. I didn't get that until I think 35 points into my class. So luckily, the game allows you to sort of build around that even in the early game, especially on normal difficulty. I put like 3 skill points into abilities I could use temporarily, and then I just put 12 levels of skill points into my class. Sure, I was way weaker in the first chapter of the game, but when I got that laser, I was suddenly so far ahead of the curve because I have this mid-game ability right near the beginning. It's a fantastic feeling that I love about this game. Not only are the builds themselves incredibly diverse, but how you go about leveling into that build is also a fantastic feeling. You can do so much theory crafting, and my favorite part, I think, the thing that really brings it all together for me in the build crafting of Grim Dawn, is that you don't have to pre-plan everything. Respecking your character in Grim Dawn is so cheap. The only thing you can't unrespec is your class decision. Once you've picked your first and second class, you can't go back on those, but you can refund every single skill point you've spent for dirt cheap. And this actually extends to apply to the secondary skill tree, the devotion system, which is this giant list of constellations, which is a little bit more complicated to get into. Luckily, like, you know, there's like 30 different constellations, which all have different attunement requirements, I think it's called, and you gain attunement by filling in other constellations through these devotion points, which are a separate skill system. They basically give you passive upgrades to fire damage, retaliation damage, armor, offense, whatever. And it would be super overwhelming. It'd be really easy to compare this to the Path of Exile skill tree as too overwhelming. But what makes it so much more digestible for me is, unlike Path of Exile, where you're leveling up every couple of minutes and gaining skill points, the devotion tree gives you 1 skill point every time you find a devotion shrine, which you'll find one maybe every 20-30 minutes. You'll find them a little bit faster at the beginning and they slow down towards the end, and you only get 50 points to spend total. So what you really just do is look at your build and say, what do I need in my build? Oh, I'm using my Aether damage laser. There is a search bar that you can just type in Aether damage, and every single node in the constellations that give Aether damage will light up. So you can look at them and say, okay, I need this attunement for that Aether damage, so I'm going to go get these other Aether damages, and then maybe some other nice supportive constellations that give me attunement to get to that constellation. It makes a lot more sense in play. I'm probably not explaining it as best as I could, because this is all just an off-the-cuff sort of review. Would you call this a review? I'm just talking about a game that I love. I don't know, I just really like the game. And again, you can even respec those devotion points. They're a little bit more expensive. I think they cost a resource that you can grind pretty easily off of certain enemies or areas in the game. And speaking of the enemies, they are, I mean, there's nothing too special about them. It's a Diablo-like, you know, there is 1,000+ enemies in any given zone, and you just run through and you slaughter them all. The cool thing about this game to keep in mind is that a lot of enemy damage doesn't come from their direct hits against you, unless you've built really poorly defensively, but it's actually going to come from their status effects. So there's a lot to be said about paying attention to what status effects the enemies inflict upon you. There's a lot of importance on clearing ads around the bosses, because a lot of ads have the ability to heal their bosses. I can't tell you how many times I've been fighting a boss and thinking, wow, this guy's health is just not going down, when in reality there was just a tiny little skeleton priest in the corner healing him for 50% of his health every 30 seconds. So it keeps you just engaged enough in your build, in what's going on, in the fights themselves, in the status effects, in the ad clearing, as well as not taking too long to get anywhere. Your next level up is never more than 20 minutes away. Even at higher levels, as long as you are doing level appropriate content, you are constantly leveling up and exploring new stuff, and once you finish the main game, you're only scratching the surface of Grim Dawn. You'll end the main campaign around level 40 to 45, and then you get to start over on Elite difficulty, which is my favorite thing in ARPGs. Give me higher difficulty New Game Plus, where every enemy is harder, they drop better better gear, you get to keep going up levels. It is the best feeling, except for the resistance system. I don't know why every ARPG defaults to this, probably because it's an easy way to code difficulty, but when you increase the difficulty to elite, not only are all the enemies a higher level, but your resistances of the 10 different resistance types in the game, all the elements, poison, aether, bleed, physical, whatever, they all drop by 25%. Now on normal, it's pretty easy to get all of your resistances up to the maximum, which is 80%. But this effectively means if you want to get to that max resistance on elite difficulty, you now need 105% because it goes down by 25%. And then when you go up to ultimate, it goes down by 50%, which means if you want optimal defense against all enemy damage types, you need to have a set of gear and skills and passives and devotions that grant 130% resistance to all of the different resistances in the game, not to mention the unique offensive ability and defensive ability stats in Grim Dawn, which I think are a really cool idea. I feel like they could have been a little bit better implemented overall. All offensive and defensive ability means is offensive ability is your chance to hit and your chance to crit enemies of your level, or whatever, higher and lower, and defensive ability is the opposite. It's your chance of getting hit and getting crit. Effectively, if enemies ever have a chance to critically hit you, your defensive ability is not high enough and you will probably get randomly one-shot, especially if a boss happens to critically hit you. Additionally, if your offensive ability is too low, and let's say you have a 90% chance to hit, well, that just means all of your damage has been reduced by 10%, which is not a small amount in a game like this. The numbers get huge, so if you're dealing 6,000 damage per hit and you're hitting 10 times a second, well, you just lost 6,000 DPS. Those two abilities, defensive and offensive, they're the most arbitrary that you need to sneak into your build, onto your gear somehow, and it's easier to do than you think, but it takes getting used to. The game is a system of components and augments, and these are things that you can find off of enemies and eventually craft into stronger versions to put directly onto your gear, to gain specific resistances, to gain specific defensive or offensive ability, or whatnot. Upgrade the armor on your gear, upgrade the blocking amount of your shield. It's a lot of customization, but at the higher difficulties, it does feel like the customization just becomes what resistance is my lowest, I'm gonna put that augment on my gear. But I love this game. There's plenty to do. A lot of those augments come from endgame reputation grinds, which a lot of people might not dig. I do, but only because you don't finish the game at max level. Even when you finish elite difficulty, you're probably not max level, which means you can keep grinding reputation and thus grinding more experience. So as your character is getting stronger, you're still finding better gear, you're unlocking better augments for better gear, and it is that constant feeling of progression that kept me coming back to Grim Dawn for like 50 hours of gameplay, which again, I know that sounds like nothing to some of these people who play, you know, 3,000 hours in Diablo 4. That's a lot for me. It takes a lot for me to stick in an ARPG after 2 playthroughs. I've done 4 different playthroughs, 3 on normal, 1 on elite, and I want to finish and come to my ultimate playthrough. It's a lot because the grind for resistances from augments and reputations is a big time sink, but I want to commit to it and I want to get it done because damn it, this game feels too good to give up right on the highest difficulty. So yeah, I just really love Grim Dawn.